Hi everyone and welcome to Creative Cakes by Sharon. Today I'm doing a tutorial on Anna from Frozen. I saw this movie with my family and we all loved it, so I thought I'll give Anna a go. So let's get started. Today I'm using a 12 by 8 inch cake, my rolling pin, a smoother, some flesh coloured fondant, a gingery coloured fondant, some light pink, some black, as well as a little bit of dark pink, a nice turquoise colour for her eyes and some white. I've also got some luster dusts here that I'm using today, white, a bit of a shimmery burgundy and some light pink. These are going to be used to highlight her face, and I've got my offset spatula, pizza cutter, an edible marker, my X-Acto blade, as well as some fluffy paint brushes. I've also got a coloured template that I'm using today. This is as a guide so that I can get her complexion right, and I've also printed out a black and white. The links for these will be in the description box, and I've already got a board which I've covered in a marble effect using some blue and white to create the look of ice and snow. I'm also using some white chocolate ganache today. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut my cake in half down the centre, and I'm going to fill it with a layer of the white chocolate ganache and put the second half of the cake onto the top. Now I'm going to grab my black and white stencil that I cut, and I'm going to put that on top of the cake and just fold her ears up on the side because we don't need those at the moment, and cut right around the stencil and remove off all of the excess. Now I'm going to cover the entire cake with my white chocolate ganache. This is going to seal the cake, give some extra flavour to the cake, as well as providing a base for the fondant to stick to. And once I've finished covering the top and sides of the cake, I'm going to pop it in the fridge for about 15 minutes to set. When the cake comes out of the fridge, it's formed a crust on the surface. So now I'm going to work on creating some raised definition for Anna's face, focusing on her nose, ears, cheeks and lips. So I'm going to put the stencil aside and grab some of my flesh coloured fondant, and I'm going to try and form a little nose for Anna. So just pulling off a small piece, I just want to create a bit of a soft triangular shape and just line it up and match it up with the bottom of the stencil. Now I'm going to do the same thing for each of her ears. Make a half circle shape to form the ear, just using the template as a guide. For the cheeks, I take 2 round balls and make them into a bit of a mound in my palm and roll out a very thin snake for her lips. Now with my pieces all ready to go, I place the stencil on top of the cake, and with the back of a paintbrush I'm going to make some indentations onto the cake using the stencil as a guide for her nose, her cheeks and her lip placement. And we can start by sticking the ears onto the side of the cake. Now the fondant's just going to stick to the white ganache that we've already covered the cake with easily. So place the ears in position using the stencil as a guide, and do the same with the nose, the cheeks and the lips. I hadn't done the bottom lip yet because I wanted to get my placement right on the cake first. So now that I'm happy with the position of all of these elements, I'm going to just roll out another very thin snake for the bottom of her lip and place it into position. I can now put the cake aside for a little while I roll out the flesh coloured fondant, and this is going to cover the entire cake. So I need to roll it out to about 2 or 3 mil thick and large enough to cover the whole cake. Once my fondant is rolled out large enough, I just roll it onto my roller and then place the cake in position and gently drape the fondant over the top of the cake. Now it's a matter of opening up the fondant down the sides and smoothing it out, and gently using my fingers to press over the bits of detail we put under the fondant, like the nose and the ears and the lips. So I'm just going to keep working on my fondant until I'm happy with the definition that's coming through. Then trim off all of the excess fondant, and then with my smoother I've just gone over the top and sides of the cake, careful not to go too close to the pieces of fondant underneath, as this will create a line and mark your cake. Now I can work on Anna's eyes. So I'm going to grab my stencil and cut around the edges of her eyes, and then I'm going to place the stencil back on top of the cake and use the back of my paintbrush to create an indentation on the inside line of her eyes. And then I'm going to remove the stencil and gently with the tip of my finger or the ball of my fingers, I'm going to press the fondant on the inside of that line that I created. So we're depressing the fondant where the eye is going to go. And this is going to help the fondant that we create the eye with to sit into the fondant rather than sitting over the top of the fondant. So we get a smoother edge between the eye and the rest of her face. You can see Anna's eyelids on this stencil, and we're going to create those by rolling a thin piece of fondant out and then positioning them on the top part of her eye. I'm going to press it down a little bit, and it's also going to help the eyelashes stand up when we get to working on those. Now I'm going to work on Anna's hair. So starting at the bottom of her fringe, I'm going to cut the template out. I'm going to keep working around until I get to these little bits of her fringe that hang over the top of most of her hair onto her forehead. And I'm going to just cut over those because I'm going to create them separately with fondant later on. And also this little piece on this side, I'm just going to cut straight across that and then over the top of her ear. Now at this part of the stencil, I'm just going to cut around the edge of her hairline. Now I can roll out the fondant for Anna's hair, and the colour I've got here is a bit of a mixture. I've started with a base orange colour, which was quite bright, and I added some red and a bit of brown and also a bit of yellow into the fondant, and I rolled it out without trying to blend the colours too much so I can get a bit of a streaking effect in the fondant so that it looks a bit more natural and a bit more like her hair, which is not just monotone. Once the fondant's been rolled out, I'm just going to grab the stencil for the hair and cut around the bottom half of the stencil. Before transferring this fondant to the cake, I'm just going to use my stencil to make a little mark as a guide for where I should place her hair, and then using my hands again smooth the fondant down the top and sides and trim off the excess. I've got the bottom half and the top piece of the stencil now back together, and I'm going to use the leftover fondant to create all the little bits of fringe that fall onto the front and side of her face, working your way across from her part which is off to the side of her head. Now using the back side of my knife, I'm going to run it along the length of her hair and create indentations all along the hair so that it looks like strands of hair. Now I'm going to work on Anna's eyebrows, so I'm just going to roll out a bit of the fondant and use the stencil as a guide to get the shape and size correct. And once I'm happy with the shape, I'm going to use my X-Acto blade to create some lines and some texture in the eyebrows so they look a bit more realistic. Then I'm just going to position them on the cake, and when I'm happy with the placement of the eyebrows, I'll adhere them with some water. We can grab the stencil back now and cut out Anna's eyelashes, and once I've done this, place them on the fondant and cut around the stencil, and then with my X-Acto blade I'm going to cut through the pieces of fondant to create each individual eyelash. Make sure you press the blade all the way through the fondant. Now with a wet paintbrush, just rub it along the underside of the eyelid and gently position the eyelashes in place. Careful not to break any of the eyelashes off. Make sure you gently press the eyelashes into the crease between her eyelid and her eye. And then use your finger or the back of a paintbrush to gently curl her eyelashes up. Now just repeat the same process for the other set of eyelashes. Now I'm going to work on Anna's eyes. So I've cut the eye shape out of the stencil. I'm going to roll out the white fondant and cut around the stencils. I'm going to brush the eye sockets with a little bit of water, and before I put the whites of the eyes down, I'm going to make sure I've got some nice smooth edges and then just place it in the eye socket and repeat these steps for the other eye. To do the colour and the pupils of Anna's eyes, we do exactly the same thing. Roll out the fondant, cut out the stencil and trace over that on the fondant, and then smoothen off the edges. Now I finished the eyes and they're off to the side, so I've grabbed my board and I'm going to transfer the cake onto the board. When you look closely at the coloured stencil of Anna, you can see that the edges of her eyes, the coloured section of her eyes, have a dark ring around them. So just with my edible marker, I'm just gently creating some definition around the edge. Now we can fix the centre of Anna's eyes into place and her face starts to take shape. Now I'm just going to add a bit more definition to the edges of her eyes, of the bottom eyelashes, so very gently around the corners of the whites of her eyes with my edible marker, I'm just going to create the look of eyelashes, a bit of depth, and also some more definition. Now comes one of the fun parts of the cake, and that's using the light pink luster dust with a fluffy brush to create a blushed appearance for Anna. She does have quite a pinkish complexion, so I just keep adding the luster dust until I get a nice pink shade that I'm happy with. Go around the sides of her face, mainly on the cheeks and especially on the nose, and you might even want to fill in a little bit on the eyelids as well. I've got here now a little bit of the dark pink fondant, which I'm just going to roll out. This is going to be like the shadow or tongue in her mouth. So I just want to roll out a little bit of a snake and press it into the cavity of her mouth. Now I'm going to use the stencil to cut out Anna's teeth and trace around it over some white fondant and position the teeth on the cake. Now I'm going to roll out 2 very thin snakes of the light pink fondant. Make sure they're very tapered at the ends to create her lips, and then attach those onto the cake as well. Using my shimmery burgundy luster dust, I'm going to go over her lips now to give it a bit of a shine and glossy and a deeper burgundy look. We're also now just going to create the little reflection on Anna's eyes, so use a tiny little piece of white fondant, roll it into a ball, and just place it in the same position that it appears on the stencil. Finally now I can work on Anna's telltale pigtails. That's a bit of a mouthful, try saying that quickly. So I've separated the remainder of my ginger fondant into 2, and now I'm going to divide each of those 2 pieces into 3 sections. Now with each of those 6 pieces I'm going to roll it into a long snake about the thickness of my thumb, and then start to assemble each plait. Now I'm just going to explain how to do a plait, just in case you're unsure. It's best to separate the 3 strands, and you take the right hand side and overlap the middle section. Then you take the left hand strand and overlap that over the middle strand. Again, go back to the right and overlap that strand over the middle piece. Again, the left over the middle, the right over the middle, and so forth. So you always take the outermost strand and overlap it over the center strand. When I reach the bottom, I simply squeeze the plait, the 3 strands together to keep them joined and cut off any excess or uneven bits. I'm going to use this little piece as the hair tie, so I'm just going to roll it out a little bit thin, add a little bit of water across the bottom of the hair, and attach the hair tie. Now I can attach the plait to the side of Anna's head by pressing the fondant up against the cake and smooth the top of the plait. Now I'm just going to repeat the process to create her second plait for the other side of her head. I'm going to use my remaining fondant to create some strands of hair to not only cover the tops of the plaits, but to also add a bit more volume and body to her hair. And you can do this until you've run out of fondant or until you're happy with the look of her hair that you've achieved. The very last thing I need to do to finish off this cake, and it wouldn't be Anna if we didn't do this, is to use the white luster dust to create a white streak from the top of her hair all the way down through her plait. And it's simply a matter of just dusting the white luster dust until you build up the white colour, and follow one strand all the way through to the bottom of her plait. And there you have it, your finished cake of Anna from Disney's movie Frozen. I hope you enjoyed my tutorial. Thanks for watching. Don't forget you can subscribe to my channel by clicking the link below for more great video tutorials.